You can have peace despite the most stressful circumstances. I want to say up front that I'm not telling this story to put my husband down in any way. Rather, I want to glorify God who restores marriages, even when it looks like it would be impossible. I am married to a great guy who was an alcoholic for over 30 years. He stopped drinking 3 years ago, something I never thought would happen. God's restoration of our marriage is truly a miracle, given all that we have been through together. One cold, dark night, about 11:30, my daughter, who was 4 years old at the time, came rushing into our bedroom, choking and struggling to breathe. I had to get her to a doctor or a hospital, and quickly. I looked over at my husband, who was passed out drunk as usual, and I knew I couldn't leave my 2-year-old son at home while I sought medical assistance for my daughter, because if he needed any help, my husband would be too drunk to get up and help him. So I woke my son up out of a sound sleep and bundled both the children into the car. I knew that there was an after-hours doctor's clinic about half an hour away, so I drove straight there. When we got there, we found it had just closed 5 minutes earlier. I was gutted and worried. I knew that there was a hospital about 10 minutes away, so I went to restart the car, but it wouldn't start. The battery had died. I checked my mobile phone. The battery was flat. I couldn't believe it. How could all this be happening when I was in the middle of a medical emergency? I had to get to a telephone so I could ring roadside assistance to get the car going. I remembered that there was a nursing home just a few doors up, but it was a bitterly cold night and pouring in rain. I knew I couldn't take the children with me. It would only make my daughter sicker. But I didn't want to leave them alone in the car either. I didn't know what to do. I turned to my daughter and said, "Can you be a really brave little girl and look after your baby brother? Mummy has to go and find someone with a phone." She bravely nodded yes. I locked the car and prayed that no one would find them. I went a few doors up to the nursing home and told them I needed to use their phone to ring roadside assistance. They wouldn't even let me come inside the building, even though it was pouring in rain. They passed me a phone through the window so I could make the phone call. I thanked them and ran back to the car, hoping that the kids were fine. They were. The operator at roadside assistance said that someone would be there in about 45 minutes. We would just have to wait. It was freezing cold in the car, but I put both kids on my lap, covered us all with a big jacket, and waited for help to come. It was during this 45 minutes that I realised that I had a choice about how I could respond here. I absolutely love the preacher Joyce Meyer, and in the past week she had preached about how God can give us peace despite our circumstances. God reminded me of these timely messages. I chose to be at peace, despite my daughter still struggling to breathe, despite the fact that our car had broken down, despite the fact that my husband was passed out drunk when I really needed him. I could choose how to respond, and I chose peace. I cuddled the children and helped them get back to sleep while I calmly waited for roadside assistance. I prayed and prayed and prayed, and I continued to choose to be at peace and calm. The level of peace I felt was unbelievable. That's why the Bible calls God's peace the peace that passes understanding. It's a kind of peace that looks to be impossible given the situation, but God is faithful. Approximately 45 minutes later, the roadside assistance man came to jumpstart the car. I quickly drove to the hospital, and just as I got to the main emergency entrance where the ambulances drive in and out, my car died again. in the middle of the emergency driveway. No ambulances or other vehicles could get in or out because my car was in the way. I just left the car in the middle of the driveway and took the children into the emergency room. To my surprise, my daughter had actually improved while all this was going on. Her breathing was much better. By the time we got to see a doctor, they gave her some oxygen, but they said that she would be fine. They said that with things like this, the cold night air can actually help. Meanwhile, some staff from the hospital came and pushed my car off the driveway so that ambulances could still get in and out. It was about 2 a.m. in the morning by now. I knew I would have to get roadside assistance out again to get my car started again, so I used a public phone at the hospital to call for them to come out again. I then tried to ring my husband. I rang and rang and rang, trying to get hold of him to let him know what was happening and that I could really use his help. He didn't answer. Another hour later, roadside assistance came again, but the technician was a horrible man and he started yelling at me for not servicing my battery. Apparently with these kinds of batteries, you had to regularly top them up with water. I had never heard of such a thing. Plus it was a really, really old bomb of a car. I had had endless battery problems and breakdowns, but I couldn't afford to buy anything better. I told the technician that I didn't know I had to put water in the battery regularly. He just kept yelling at me. I knew I just had to stay calm and hold my tongue, even though he was behaving like a bully. Here I was, stuck in the driveway of a hospital at 2 o'clock in the morning with 2 small children, and this was the second breakdown I'd had for the night. He should have had empathy for the plight I was in, but he didn't. I kept my mouth shut while he replaced the battery. I thanked him very much for his help and began driving home. It was now that I started feeling angry at my husband. He didn't have to work the next day, but I did. I could feel myself getting angrier and angrier, but once again I remembered that I could choose to hold my temper and stay at peace. We finally got home about 2:30 in the morning. I woke my husband up to tell him what had happened, but he couldn't care less. He was just annoyed that I had woken him up. All I had wanted was just a little bit of empathy, just an arm around me telling me he was sorry for all that I'd been through. But I didn't get that. He went straight back to sleep. I tucked the kids back in and they went back to sleep. I went to bed and contemplated the night's events. It was truly miraculous that God had kept me at peace in the most stressful of circumstances. I thanked God for his peace and his strength and went to sleep. In the Bible in Philippians 4:7 it says, "And the peace of God, which is beyond our understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus."